Aloha everybody, I'm Greg Asner. I'm with the Center for Global Discovery and Conservation Science here on the Big Island. It's my pleasure today to introduce and talk with Kim Fuller, who's with the Department of Land and Natural Resources, Division of Aquatic Resources. Welcome to the Coral Classroom, Kim.
Thanks, Greg. Great to be here.
So, as I understand it, you're from Hawaii originally. Tell me about that.
Yep, born and raised on the island of Oahu in Hawaii.
Tell me a little bit about how you got so interested in the ocean.
Well, growing up in an island, the ocean surrounds us. So a lot of my recreational activities took place in the ocean. Grew up paddling, kayaking for school, yeah.
Awesome. How long have you been a scuba diver?
I have been a scuba diver, I think, since 2007.
So today's topic is aquatic invasive species. What are they?
Well, aquatic invasive species are obviously aquatic species, so that could be freshwater, brackish, or marine. And invasive is generally termed for non-native. So non-native species that can cause harm to the environment, the economy, or to human health.
Wow, they sound pretty scary. I mean, do we have a lot of invasive species on our reefs? Like in kind of a global scale, are we good, bad, really bad? Where do we stand as Hawaiian reefs?
Well, so we have about over 550 introduced aquatic species in general, and the state of California has about 400. And so we're a pretty small state, so we actually have as many invasive species as comparable to any other place in the world.
Wow, and we're here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, yet we have about as many invasive species as anywhere else, even places that are closer to land masses.
Yes.
Wow, they really get around. What are invasive species? I mean, is it mostly algae? Are there invasive fish? I mean, just tell us more broadly how big of a problem this is.
So in Hawaii, we have, about 6 to 7 invasive algae. So algae is basically like seaweed. The Hawaiian word for algae is limu. But I don't like to call the invasive algae as limu. I like to reserve that for native species. They're terrible. They just outcompete the reefs. So they can overgrow and smother coral, as well as cause monocultures. So native limu can be outcompeted by the invasive introduced limu.
Tell us what goes on in your day-to-day life of dealing with these invaders.
Well, so one of our major projects is to manage invasive algae, particularly on Oahu. So we actually grow native sea urchins that are called collector urchins, or Trypnustes gratilla, and we outplant them on the invasive algae, and they graze the algae so that the coral competing with the invasive algae has a chance to grow. So that's called, herbivore pressure or grazing.
Wow, so that's like using biology to fight biology, or sort of to compensate.
Correct. It's a native biocontrol.
Got it. Biocontrol. And so that's mostly happening on Oahu, or is that statewide?
So currently we are outplanting urchins in Kaneohe Bay, which is on the east shore of Oahu, and we also outplant urchins in Waikiki Marine Life Conservation District.
So it sounds like one of the ways you guys combat these invasive algae is kind of using herbivores. Tell us, what is an herbivore? What are the different types of species that you would call herbivore?
Well, an herbivore is anything that eats plants. So underwater, that's going to be fish or invertebrates like sea urchins that eat algae. A healthy herbivore population is crucial because that will help to combat macroalgae or invasive algae and allow coral to grow, which is an important ecosystem for many juvenile fish and other things like that.
Wow. Okay, so there's a whole class of fish that are herbivores. It sounds like most sea urchins are herbivores. Are there any others?
Yes. So sea cucumbers are herbivores as well. I think that's most of it.
Yeah. So you have a lot of you have a lot of choice how you can do it. So as a management agency, you guys are trying to keep the herbivores grazing on these algae. What happens if when that doesn't work? What's the outcome?
Well, if there's not enough herbivores,
Yeah.
it's a lot easier for macroalgae to overgrow and kill coral, especially the invasive ones.
If you put algae here and you don't have enough herbivores, then will the algae grow over these surfaces, this kind of coral surface?
Yes.
What happens?
Yes, that's correct. So the algae, especially invasive algae, has a much faster growth rate than the coral, and it can overgrow and smother the coral.
Who cares if it overgrows these corals? What happens to the coral if that algae just goes crazy?
Well, the corals will actually die. The corals need sunlight as well as water flow. It also will plug all the little holes in the coral reef that many animals need to live in.
Oh, I see. So it just crowds everything out.
Correct.
So it sounds like you got a tough job. You're trying to understand all of these algae, and then some of them you're trying to actually combat with these herbivores. And what do you do to try to get the herbivore population up?
Well, so you can set regulations for certain areas, especially those with algae problems. So one example of that is on Maui, the Kahikili Herbivores Management Area. So they banned the take of herbivores to combat an invasive algae, Acanthophyra, which is called prickly seaweed.
Is it working?
It did, I believe so, yes. It seems that the coral actually has room to grow because the herbivores are grazing the algae down.
Wow, that's amazing. So you guys are actually doing these kinds of large experiments while you're trying to manage the reef, trying to find what works, what doesn't work, and adjusting over time. It must just be a constant battle.
Yes, it is. And so I think there's other factors beyond herbivory that also influence whether a habitat will be algae dominated or coral dominated.
Like, tell me more about that.
Well, one example is nutrients. So algal growth is really, does really well with a lot of nutrients. So we want to think about malka or upland, what nutrients are going into a system. And if it's an artificial influx of nutrients, that may yield to an invasive algae invasion in certain areas.
So let me say that part back so that I can understand it. Maybe our viewers will get it twice. Is that you're saying what we do on land generates nutrients like agriculture or stuff like that actually come into the ocean. The nutrients fertilize the algae, and the algae just goes crazy. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
Wow. Okay. So we got to deal with land issues. We got to deal with these invaders. We got to do it all together in some sort of connected way.
Yeah, and so that's why a lot of people are thinking about ridge to reef or maka to makai management. We really have to think about what we do on land because it influences the sea.
What is the major way that invasive algae get to Hawaii from somewhere as far away as, say, Indonesia or the Caribbean? How do they even get here?
So there's probably about 3 vectors. So definitely, if we categorize them very broadly, that would be humans. So it's humans that bring invasive species to new places. The major vector for marine species is actually shipping. So there is a hull fouling. On the bottom of a ship is a hull, and on that, organisms can grow. And so if you have organisms growing on a hull somewhere else, and you don't clean before you come to a new place, you effectively are bringing those organisms over.
I see. Wow. On ships, like people.
Yes.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you ever deal with the fact that maybe somebody is actually introducing a species either on purpose or by accident, just by their own actions? Is there stuff that we as citizens can do to make sure we're not part of the problem?
Yes. So that's exactly right. That's another major vector for aquatic invasive species is people accidentally or on purpose
put them, what? They just take them out in the backyard when they're tired of them and put them in the stream, and they end up being a problem.
Yes, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, let's not do that. Well, I want to thank you, Kim, for being part of the Coral Classroom. I learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers learned a lot, and just great to be down here on the reef. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Grace. Great to be here.
Okay, I'll see you on the reef.
See you on the reef.